So when you utter those words that you are against plural marriage, think about who you are opposing, the Lord of the world. Fear Allah Jalla wa Ala when you speak about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Due to the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَانْكِهُ مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. Surah An-Nisa, ayah number 3. And marry those whom you desire, or marry those women. Na'am. Marry the women of your choice, either 2 or 3 or 4. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the ability for him to marry the women of his choice outside of those forbidden categories. So that shows the permissibility of plural marriages. Then he speaks for a page and a half or 2 pages just on the issue of plural marriages, and I'll mention that now inshallah. He mentions, so when a man marries a woman who is free, it is allowed for him to marry a free woman. Then it is allowed for him to marry up to 4 of those women. And there are many benefits in plural marriage between a man and taking 4 women to marry. And he said, and this is not hidden from anyone who has true insight and understanding of the deen and even understanding of the worldly affairs. A man or a woman or any human who has aql and insight knows that there is benefits in this affair. And then he mentioned some of them. Na'am. He mentions that if a man was to restrict himself to only one woman, then there are many other women who therefore will not be able to find a husband to marry. And that is because in most societies, that the women, they outnumber the men. The women, they outnumber the men. So there are many unmarried women. So now what happens is that those women now, if they are pious, they enter into celibacy. That they remain celibate. And they do not fulfill those affairs that Allah has permitted them to fulfill with their husbands of relationship in the bed. So therefore, in a society like that, there comes about harm. And a woman, she's in need. He mentions from those benefits is that a woman herself is in need of being looked after. In her nature, she needs to be looked after. This is a yearning that women have up with their fitrah. This is a part of their innate nature, that there is a need for them to be looked after. And there is a need for them to have someone in authority who can take care of their needs. The fact that the man looks after and takes care over 4 women is from those affairs, is from those affairs that is a sharing of responsibility to prevent women from falling into celibacy and permanent celibacy, or remaining unmarried, or falling into sin and fornication and other than that. So when a man takes another wife, or a 3rd wife, or a 4th wife, he's actually taking a responsibility upon society, or for the society. Because the women, they outnumber the men, and he prevents corruption in society. Then he mentions, so this is a benefit. And that is the fact that there are women, that the women outnumber the men in most, if not all, societies. So the men take the burden of responsibility, of maintenance and care. So the woman here is in a state of being advantaged, that she is in an advantageous position, that she receives nafaqah, that she receives maintenance, financial, and that she is given living quarters, that she is sheltered, and she is looked after, and her passions are fulfilled with her husband. And this is from the maslahah. This is from her, for her benefit. And it is something that prevents her from being unwanted and unneeded and unmarried. So it gives her something in terms of benefit for her. And likewise he mentions in society in general that men are more prone to disease than women. That's why in most societies men die before women. Men die and they are more prone to disease than women. And men are exposed to wars and exposed to dangers that women are not exposed to. And many men, they die in war and battle. And they die in disasters because they are predominantly out of the house or in accidents and so on. So many numbers amongst the men, they pass away and they die. So then the women, they remain. Thereafter, the women, they remain. And they remain unmarried. And they remain celibate. And remain unfulfilled. So for this reason, or in this, we see the permissibility of plural marriage, that it fulfills these gaps and these difficulties that are present in society. He mentions likewise, the woman, she is afflicted with something throughout her life. For example, that she is afflicted with menstruation, the monthly bleeding, with nifas, the postnatal bleeding, and with childbirth. So therefore, in this situation, the man, in those situations, the man remains unfulfilled because he only has one wife. So when she is menstruating and when she has these other difficulties, that he now is prevented. And he may be a youth or a man who has strong desires. So in that situation, if he marries more than one woman, then the harm is removed from him and from society and from the family itself. Why? Because he will not now look, if he can take a second wife and a third wife and a fourth wife, and of course he looks after them properly, then that man has removed from him harm and from his family harm, because he will not be a sinner. And he will not fornicate, he will not commit adultery, and he will not be from those who commit major sins, because he has done something that is halal for him instead. He mentions likewise, from that which is known, is that the woman, she reaches her menopause in her 50s. Predominantly in their 50s, the women, they enter into the menopausal period. And then much of their desire, much of their passions and their desire, they dissipate. As for the men, then the men, their passions and their desire, it remains strong. And their preparedness and their ability over women in this arena, then it continues right into very old age. So it is not permissible and it is not correct that the man remains for the rest of his life and he is forbidden from children and he is forbidden from relations and companionship, intimate companionship. It is not correct that that should be done. So Allah created them in this manner, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted them to have more than one wife. So for the man to be prevented whilst the woman, she enters into menopause, and therefore thereafter he is prevented from fulfilling his desires, then this opposes wisdom. And this also opposes the benefits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created and given to his servants. So the wisdom behind plural marriage, a man taking more than one wife, up to 4 wives, there is a great benefit in that. And he spends from his wealth, and he gives from himself. So it is not that he just takes wives, but he looks after them. Those children are his children. They are registered as his children. And the woman, she is secure, and she is looked after. And he's responsible over her. He shelters her, he clothes her, he protects her, and he has jealousy over her. This is the religion of Al-Islam. He mentions that the prophets themselves, alayhimus salatu wassalam, that they used to have many wives. They used to enter into plural marriages. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself, 11 wives throughout his life. And at any one time he would have more than one wife. It's only Khadijah that he married, that he kept her up until she died, radiyallahu anha. After that, he entered into plural marriages over and over. He mentions likewise the Prophet Sulaiman, alayhi salam, and other than him from the prophets, that they used to have many wives, as is well known. So this is not something that is just specific to the Islamic Sharia, as it is claimed. Rather, and however, it was the Christians who innovated in this affair. Because the Christians, they innovated and committed a bid'ah by making forbidden that which Allah had allowed in their scripture and in the scripture of the Jews. The Ahlul Kitab, they were allowed in their scriptures to marry plural marriages, but then they innovated into their religion and then they prevented it. And this is not from the Sharia that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to them. So the Nasara, the Christians, that they remain and they restrict themselves only to one woman. It may sound good, for the women anyway, that they restrict themselves to one woman, but however, this is a bid'ah that they introduced. He mentions, but look at them now. He said, look at how they behave. They will say that you can only marry one woman and you cannot increase upon her. And they make it haram in their religion and they make it haram in their laws. Yet they do not mind and they do not forbid a man from having many girlfriends, and with living with whomsoever he wishes in a haram manner. That they will not prevent. The legal marriage, the halal marriage that gives security to a woman, that strengthens the family, that makes her children legitimate and gives them a father, and the religion of Al-Islam that makes it binding upon him by law, by the Islamic law, to provide for them and to look after them and to protect them. None of those are in place. A man has a woman at home, that is his wife, the Christians. Or the Jews, or other than them from the non-Muslims, they will have a wife at home that they've married. But then they will leave the home and they will have a mistress on the side that they will fornicate with, maybe catch diseases with, return home and then infect their own wives. Or they will have illegitimate children that they will claim is not my child. So then you have in society illegitimate children who do not have a father that they can recognize as being their father. He does not have to provide for her. All he uses her for is for sexual gratification. No responsibility. So the societies that allow this, those are the societies that do not understand this affair, what harm they are causing to their own populations by allowing these types of affairs to perpetuate and to continue. Then he mentions, then you have those from amongst the Muslims who carry the banner of being against plural marriage, and they hate it, and they speak ill of polygamy and plural marriages. Those women and those men who are upon this also from amongst the Muslims, then they are affected by the ideologies of the Christians. And they speak with their speech, and they are a mouthpiece for the Christians in claiming that by having plural marriages, that within it there is oppression. He said, never is there oppression in that. In the actual act of plural marriages, there's no oppression. فَلَيْسَ فِي هَذَا ظُلْمٌ لِلزَّوْجَاتِ. There is not in plural marriages the legislation and the Sharia legislation of plural marriages, there is not any dhulm. Rather, there is within it justice for the women, Because the Sharia makes binding upon those marriages justice and fairness, adl, as opposed to those relationships of fornication and adultery and infidelity. No responsibility, no honor. Who's your man? Oh, I'm going out with a married man. Or I'm sleeping with a married man. How much greater humiliation and dishonor is there for a woman that she was to say that, and her father knows that my daughter is saying that? How humiliating, how debasing, how lowly, both for the married man and for this fornicating woman. The adulterous man and the fornicating woman, how humiliating upon them that they leave that which is noble, which Allah has permitted, the Lord of the heavens and the earth. Take a second wife. Look after the first one, look after the second one. Just as you look after the first one, look after the second one, the third and the fourth. Look after them all equally. Caring for them, sustaining them, providing for them and sheltering them and giving them honor. So you don't hide them in sleazy hotel rooms. A'udhu billah. And these rendezvous that the kuffar and those masakeen and those fusaq from the Muslimin, those sinners from the Muslims who enter into. How wicked and how evil is that which they do. Causing corruption in their homes, causing corruption in their bodies, causing corruption in society and in the community. Causing corruption in lineage that leads to fighting and bloodshed and killing because of these types of affairs. Not like this, my sisters. So when you utter those words that you are against plural marriage, think about who you are opposing, the Lord of the worlds. The Lord of the worlds. I hate it. And I don't agree with it. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fear Allah jalla wa ala when you speak about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَيْسَ فِي هَذَا ظُلْمٌ لِلزَّوْجَاتِ. كَلَّا. Never is there any dhulm in the institution of polygamy upon the wives. Rather, there is within it justice for the women. وَفِيهِ خَيْرٌ. There is in it good. And if a man transgresses against his wives, then he must be prevented from that transgression and from that wrongdoing and from that injury that he causes to his wives. That has got nothing to do with the institution of polygamy. That is to do with the character and the wicked character of that man who is oppressive and unjust towards his women folk. He may oppress his own daughters. He may oppress his own mother, his own blood sisters, never mind his own wives. That is not an institution. That is not now a reason to say, well, we shouldn't have daughters because all men oppress daughters. No. There's nothing wrong with the institution of childhood and having daughters or sons. The problem is the man himself. The problem is not with the legislation of Allah. So that man is prevented from oppression. And he is shown and he is stopped from going outside of the limits of the Sharia. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He obligated justice upon the women folk in plural marriage. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and if you fear that you cannot deal justly between the orphan girls that you marry, then marry other women of your choice in 2s or 3 or 4. Showing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, and if you are not able to do justice between them, فَوَاحِدَةً. And if you are not able to do justice between the second and the third and the fourth wife, then marry only one. Then marry only one. So there is no problem with the institution of polygamy and plural marriage. The problem lies in the man not being able to do justice. And every man should know what he is capable of. And he should not allow his desires to take him away and to lead him astray and to cause him to be unjust. He should be taken by his hand, by his brothers, and advised that you are a miskeen pauper. You've got the first one on benefits, you're going to put the second one on benefits. Your children are roaming the streets as they are. What are you doing with the second and third wife? You're not being responsible over what you have. Taken by his hand by his brothers and advised. However, if he is capable, he's a man, he's a rajul, able, strong, with quwwah and rajula. He's a father, he's a husband, he's a good son. Then this type of man should not be prevented, so long as he has the ability. He mentions in conclusion in the final sentence, in this, therefore, is the permissibility for the one who is able to be just between his wives, that he may go ahead and take a second, third, or fourth wife. As for the one who is not able to fulfill the desired justice between his wives, then this one is prevented from taking multiple wives. And he cannot, and he is not able, and he should not, and he cannot establish justice between them. And therefore, he is to be prevented from oppression and from transgression and from tyranny.